Okay, so one thing that was mentioned in the opening remarks that kind of hit me as I'm thinking about the newer people that are here today is the last thing that was read was the Ford first edition on page XIII. And the second full paragraph there says to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. And if you notice the words precisely how we have recovered, that's all in italics. Of all the readings this morning, I believe that's the only thing that's in italics. When something's in italics, it means that it's pretty important to pay attention to. And the words precisely how we have recovered, I want to go back to, we are going to learn with precision how they have recovered. This, as it was pointed out, is a textbook. So we're not going to get a bunch of opinion, and we're also not going to get a bunch of different ways all these different people recovered. We're going to learn the A1 Unique AA recovery program, and they're not going to leave us guessing of how to do this step or how to do that step. All the directions, I believe on the top of page 29 even says they are clear-cut directions are given showing how we recovered, precisely how we have recovered. That's what we're going to learn here. So knowing that, that's what Alcoholics Anonymous is, the story of how lots and lots of people recovered, precisely how they recovered. That's all that Alcoholics Anonymous is. So for some of the newer people who may go to other meetings or may have gone to other meetings, I just want you to kind of pay attention to what you hear today as we're going through these readings. Because again, I'm not going to be giving any of my opinions whatsoever, or at least I certainly in hell try to do my best not to. But I want you to compare these precise directions that were given in this book as we go through it and compare it to some of the things that you hear in meetings when they discuss this step or that step, and and ask yourself, am I hearing opinions at these other meetings, or am I hearing these clear-cut directions? And if we know that these clear-cut directions show precisely how they recovered, we also know that in most of these other meetings, I'll read how it works. That starts out with rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. So this is the path in this book. And it's going to be rare for you to fail if you thoroughly do these clear-cut, precise directions that are in here. Now, if we know that, my first question as a new person would be, well, if I'm at a meeting and you guys got these directions that'll make it rare for me not to recover, I mean, my chances are very, very high. Why would we not have this book out to discuss and go over these directions so that I understand them? What, that regardless of what's being talked about, that's what I would think, that we would want to be discussing. And that's what we're going to be discussing here. Furthermore, I would say that, when the opening lines were read, I started thinking to myself, wasn't it awfully nice of them, the authors? More than 100 men and women, and they all recovered. Okay, so you got this group of people who have found a way out, seem to be hopeless. They tried every which way they couldn't. They got these directions. They all followed the exact same ones, and they all recovered. Think about how much effort they had to put in order to write this book. They didn't have to write a book. I mean, I think about it today, those of us who have recovered, I'm one who has recovered. There's other people I know in this room that have recovered that are here. And some of us don't even have the ambition to even go out and mentor one person to read this book to them. Imagine the amount of willingness and effort they had to put into not only do that, but actually write it into a book and go back and forth between all 100 of them to write it. That was awfully nice of them. It's a lot of effort they put in. And why did they really do it? Yes, one, to pass the message, but two, I think more importantly is they didn't want it changed. We've got clear-cut directions. If we just do this by word of mouth, they know how us alcoholics are. Well, I found another way to do this a little differently, and then I'm going to go spreading it a different way, and then somebody else is going to go spreading it a different way. And by the time that happens, think about this, 80-something years later, where we are now, again, when you start seeing the way that this meeting is run and what we're talking about and discussing, some of it will completely contradict many things that you've heard in AA at other meetings, which is telling me that things are even different today than they were when they were running meetings back in like the 40s and 50s, and they had this book. Can you imagine how different it would be today if they wouldn't have even written this down? I would fathom to guess that we probably wouldn't even be sitting here today. So with that, I just want you to make the comparison because a lot of people say or will feel like, this is just different information. And maybe and I've even heard people say, I've even heard it even opened at this meeting Saturday morning live in Georgia with sometimes somebody who would open the meeting would say, this is a different way we're doing it. This is not a different way we're doing this. This might be different than maybe what you're used to in contemporary AA meetings, but this is not different than the way they used to do it in the 40s and 50s when they had a 75+% recovery rate, as you will see in Ford, the second edition, if you take the time to read it. So with that, I'm going to stop that, and I want to end up getting to where we left off. And we had left off last week, if I'm not mistaken, on the top of page 24. Is that correct? That's what I have marked. Does anybody have confirmation of that? I believe that's where we left off. So if nobody has anything contradicting that, we'll go through it. And if you hear it a second time, then so be it. But I believe that's where we left off, is the top of 24. And to kind of, for those who were not with us last week, what I would like to do is back up one page and just go over a few things, a few important pieces of information to bring us up to speed. On the top of page 23, they tell us, first full paragraph, it says, these observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle into motion. The cycle they're talking about is the cycle that we read about in the doctor's opinion, right? So we know we have a condition of the mind and body, right? The problem with the body is when we put alcohol in, alcoholics have an allergic reaction that manifests itself as a physical craving to have more. That's why when we start drinking, we have trouble controlling the amount we take. As soon as we put in the first one, then we have a physical craving beyond our mental control for the second one, third one. We drink more than we intend to. And then we have a problem with the mind, that obsession. In short, is when we try stopping altogether, many of us can, for different periods of time. Somebody might make it a week, 6 months, whatever it might be. We can stop. But sooner or later, we end up picking it up again. No matter how bad we want to or need to stop, we always end up picking it up again. And it's because of this obsession of the mind. So we know that there's a two-pronged situation we're dealing with here up to this page. Now, the next statement they make is we're going to look at that two-prong and we're going to start talking about, well, what's the name of this chapter? There is a solution. And we've already discussed the word A is defined as one unique solution. So we're going to get into the details of how we're attacking this two-pronged deal. The next sentence says, therefore, the main problem of the two problems we know of, the main problem of the alcoholic, that centers in his mind rather than in his body. Okay, so that means we're not going to be discussing so much about the allergy now. The problem is in the mind, and that is, why do we pick up that first one? Once we quit, once we know we have to quit, want to quit, no matter how bad, why do we pick it up again? Because if you don't pick up the first one, you'll never have to worry about the allergy. So the problem that we're focused on is the mind. And what we're going to start learning about as soon as we pick back up to where we were last week is exactly what is wrong with the mind. I think it was Will that said that he had heard my mentor say one time that, you can't fix the problem if you don't understand what the problem is. So they're going to be talking about the solution, but now they're talking about, let me tell you about the problem. You've learned about the mind and body. We're telling you now the mind is the problem. We're going to tell you exactly why you pick it up every time you quit. You stay sober for a while and then you pick it up again. We're going to tell you why that is. And it has nothing to do with willpower or anything. And it goes on to say, if you ask him why he started on that last bender, the chances are he's going to offer you any of 100 alibis. And some of these excuses have a certain plausibility, but none of them really make sense in the light of the havoc an alcoholic's drinking bout creates. They sound like the philosophy of a man who, having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hammer so he can't feel the ache anymore. Next paragraph goes on to say, once in a while, he may tell the truth. Alcoholics aren't real keen about telling the truth, especially about drinking, but it says every once in a while, they might tell the truth as to why they picked it up. So why is it? I would underline this. And the truth, strange to say, is usually he has no more idea why he took that first drink than you have. And I would ask, this is for an alcoholic, what a real alcoholic is. And if you have tried quitting before and ended up picking it up again, and many of us have had that happen many, many times, ask yourself on your last drink, especially you within the last 6 months, that have less than 6 months, ask yourself, you probably tried quitting on your own, and then you went back to it again. The question is why did you do it? Do you have any idea why you picked it up? What was the reason that made you think, yep, this will be well worth it for me to do it? Usually they have no idea. And it goes down in the bottom of that paragraph. There is this obsession. Now we're talking about the mind, the obsession of the mind. It says there's the obsession that somehow, someday they will beat the game, but they often suspect they are down for the count. All right, so last paragraph on 23. This leads into the problem. The tragic truth is that if the man be a real alcoholic, the happy day may not arrive. He has lost control. I would underline this. At a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, this is a real alcoholic, at a certain point, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. Have you had a powerful desire to stop and found you couldn't? That's a real alcoholic. That's really all you got to answer, by the way, if you want to know whether you're an alcoholic or not. And this is important. The tragic situation has already arrived in practically every case long before it is suspected. And we talked about that last week. The only way you're going to suspect that you can't stop is you have to try to stop. And for us to try to stop, there must be a problem. So early in our drinking careers, we don't have a problem. Alcohol does exactly what we want it to do. It makes us feel wonderful. It is a solution to our problems. And for many of us, not all of us, but for many of us, we can go many, many years where it's a solution that works. When I was younger, man, it gave me, they call it liquid courage, I hear every once in a while. It made me feel better. It made me feel like I'm fitting in, and it made me feel like I belong. And that is something that I could not get on my own. It worked. But at a certain point, it works until it doesn't. And then when it stops working, then we get in a little trouble. And then we start paying a little more attention to it, just like we saw in Bill's story. It'll continue to get worse. It's progressive in that way until finally we say, okay, enough is enough. I have to quit. And then I try to stop. And many of us are astonished to find I can't. And then I try again and we find I can't. I can't stop. Every time I try, I end up going back. And it says here that, you might think to yourself, my God, I can't believe I must, kind of looking at it, like I said last week, like pre-diabetes, like, okay, now I found I can't. Now I'm going to have to do something about this before I become a real alcoholic. They're saying once you try to stop, you've already crossed the line a long time ago. That had happened long before. You just never tried stopping. So if you've gotten to that point, believe me, you are far along. You are full-blown alcoholic. That is the situation. Now, as we go into this next paragraph, to me, anyways, is probably one of the top 3, I think, lines in this book that carry importance to me. Because again, if you guys remember, the first 4 chapters out of 12, over about 33% of these directions, a third of these directions, are just about learning whether you're an alcoholic or not. Okay? That's the whole reason so step 1 is a pretty intensive deal of learning. It's learning what's in the first third of this book. And so we're going to learn what an alcoholic is in the first third of this book, which we're in right now. And now they're telling us, really, we've told you about the 2 conditions, but now we're going to focus just on the mind, because that's the problem. That's the main problem. And this paragraph tells us specifically what is wrong with why you pick it up every time you quit if you're an alcoholic. Because it just said, chances are, if you tell the truth every once in a while, you have no idea why you picked it up. Right here, they're going to tell you, this is why we pick it up. This is the only place in the book I find that. This is how you will understand the problem before we get into the solution. And it says the fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, we don't know why, they've lost the power of choice and drink. Keep this in mind. If you're a real alcoholic, we have no choice in whether we drink. We might think we do, but we don't, is what they're saying. So it's not about willpower. We do not. You may hear people at meetings say, today I have a choice. Not according to Alcoholics Anonymous. If you're an alcoholic, even if you're recovered, you still don't have a choice. It is not a choice. It is dependent on God, period. That's what we're going to find. So we've lost that power. And this is why we've lost the power. It says our so-called willpower, which is what we use when we try to stop, that holds us in check for a while, that willpower, it says it becomes practically non-existent. So why would that be? When I say, my God, my wife said she's going to leave me and take the kids if I drink again, and I don't want that to happen. So I want to quit and honestly want to, and I try. And I end up picking it up again. Why would that be? It could not have been more important to have the drink than to have my family. So why is that? This is why. And I would underline and highlight this because as alcoholics, we are unable at certain times, and this is why we're studying this, is so that we understand specifically what they're saying at certain times. This does not happen all the time. At certain times, we are unable to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against that first drink. What they're saying is if you're a real alcoholic, we got a memory problem. We have a memory problem. So what happens is, again, I'll go back to the situation where my wife's going to leave me and take the kids with her, and I'm going to be done if I don't stop. So I stop. And let's say I stop for 5 months or 6 months, but I'm going to pick it up again at one point. You know why? Because along that 5 or 6 months, there's going to be a point where, as they talked about in the doctor's opinion, because now that I'm sober, I stop because I don't want to lose everything. I start getting miserable. And the longer I stay stopped, if I'm a real alcoholic, the more, get this, sober is not the solution, because for an alcoholic, sober is really a big problem for an alcoholic, big problem. Because when we're sober, we just keep getting more and more miserable. And the more miserable we get, the more we think about the ease and comfort we can only get from one thing, which is having a few drinks. So we're thinking about it and we're telling ourselves, then our willpower steps in and says, no, we stop. But it says at certain times, there will be one time when that drink gets pushed our way and we are not going to reflect on the consequence for 1 second. And we're just going to pick it up and we're going to drink. It's going to set off that allergic reaction. We're going to drink more than we intend to. And then we're going to get into all sorts of trouble. And we're going to come to the next morning and pound our fists on the table, as they say, asking, how did this happen again? That's why. Because we have a mental blank spot. And if you understand that, that is the mental illness here. Is that mental blank spot. Now, if I cannot bring into consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago, do I think my sponsor is going to be able to bring that into my mind? There's nobody that's going to be able to bring it into my mind. That is why they say that this is a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Seemingly hopeless state. We are without defense against the first drink. We are beyond human aid. So if we're to find a solution, which is what this chapter is about, we need to understand that that solution is got to be, it has to come from something other than humans. That means even if you say, well, I go to AA meetings and this group is my higher power, the group is filled with human beings. That is a human power. We are beyond human aid. We have to understand that. Beyond the aid of a doctor, psychologist, psychiatrist, sponsor, people are not going to be the solution. The only job of your mentor or sponsor is to show you what's in this book of how to recover. They are not responsible, nor are they able to stop you from drinking. And you even hear things every once in a while that sounds completely contradictory to what I'm reading here, because they'll say, a sponsor getting a new person, listen, here's my number. If you think about drinking, call me. Okay, well, based on what I read here, the one time that I'm not going to reflect on the consequences, that means I'm going to see nothing wrong with it. All it's going to do is provide me ease and comfort. Why would the hell would I call you other than to ask you if you want to join me? I don't see nothing wrong with it, so there's no reason I'm going to call you. That's why that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It's not part of this program. So that's the problem. Goes on, the almost certain consequences. We know certain consequences that follow taking even a glass of beer do not crowd into the mind to deter us. We're not reflecting. If these thoughts do occur, they're hazy and readily supplanted with the old threadbare idea that this time we shall handle ourselves like other people, such as, I'm only going to have 2. This time. I would underline there's a complete failure of the kind of defense that keeps one from putting his hand on a hot stove. I love that statement because it is a great comparison to what we are like. If you end up burning your hand on a hot stove, at a young age, say 4 or 5 years old, you know, it looked pretty, it's all glowing, you put your hand on it, you get burned, you will never forget that. You will never put your hand on that stove again. Okay. The memory of the suffering that you went through from getting burned will stay with you your entire life. And there will never be a point when you're just going to have that lapse where I'm not going to bring into my consciousness the idea of what that felt like. You're always going to know it. Okay. But for us, we get burned a lot worse than just from being burned by a stove. Yet we are not going to reflect on the consequences. That is a form of insanity. When you look at step 2 about talking about being restored to sanity, that is the solution. This is what they mean by the insanity that we have. Obviously, if they're saying you're going to be restored to sanity, it must indicate that you're insane. So by insane, that does not mean crazy. Okay. Sanity is defined as wholeness or soundness of mind. Insanity would be the opposite. It is a mind that is not whole. Might be 99.5% there. But when it comes to alcohol, this deal, when we don't reflect on the consequences, we make the insane decision to pick up a drink. And the consequences are going to way outweigh the reward we're going to get from it. That is insane to do that. It would be just as insane to put your hand on the hot stove again, knowing it's going to burn you. But we don't realize it's going to burn us. That is the insanity. And it says in step 2 that God could restore us to sanity. Well, that's exactly what happens. When we say that we're recovered alcoholics, that does not mean that we're cured. It means that this insanity gets removed. Today, I can constantly reflect. You know, I like to look at the fact that I'm a diabetic. I know that a lot of sugar is not good for me. So if somebody passes cake my way, I might only take half of a slice. There's no time that I forget that I'm a diabetic and think I can eat the whole cake. Okay, I never forget that. I just always know that, and I keep it in check, and it's fine. And it doesn't mean that I hate people who eat sugar, and it doesn't mean that I get pissed off at everybody around me who's eating a full slice of cake. I really don't give a shit. To me, it's poison if I have too much of it. That's to me. Alcohol is the same way. To me, it's poison. I don't have a problem with alcohol. I don't have a problem with it in my house. I don't have a problem with other people who drink. Just to me, I never forget the consequences. So, it's not a problem because I always remember that. That and what that means is that insanity has been removed. I don't have that lapse in memory anymore. And the only way that we found to be able to get rid of that lapse in memory, that insanity, is by having a spiritual experience that they talk about in step 12 so that we can recover from this condition. Just want to put those pieces together so you can understand some of these things that you may have heard in AA about a spiritual experience and what is insanity. And this is how it all comes together. And this is precisely what they're talking about. All right. The alcoholic may say to himself in the most casual way, it won't burn me this time, and this is how. Or perhaps he doesn't think at all, right? How often have some of us begun to drink in this nonchalant way, and after the third or fourth pound on the bar and said to ourselves, for God's sake, how did I ever get started again? Only to have that thought supplanted by, well, I'll stop with the sixth drink, or what's the use anyhow? Underline this. When this sort of thinking that they just described, when that's fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, he has probably placed himself highly beyond human aid. That is beyond human aid if that is your condition, when you have that sort of thinking. And unless he's either locked up or die, or he will go permanently insane. That's door number 1, 2, and 3, if that is your condition. Sooner or later, you're going to be locked up, or you're going to die, or you're going to go insane. That is the only 3 things that we have found that happens to a real alcoholic who has this sort of thinking. These stark and ugly facts have been confirmed by legions of alcoholics throughout history. But for the grace of God, there would have been thousands more convincing demonstrations. So many want to stop, but cannot. So there is a solution. Now we're finally getting to what the solution is. So what is the solution to this problem? They're going to give us a little indication of what it looks like. It says, well, almost none of us, remember the first more than 100, this is what they're all saying, almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of pride, and the confession of shortcomings, which the process requires. Underline that word require, that's a requirement for its successful consummation. In other words, if you want to successfully have a spiritual experience to recover, these are the things that are required. self-searching, leveling of pride, confession of shortcomings. Those are the three main pieces. Did you see anything in there that says it is required that you go to 4 meetings a week or 5 meetings a week or a meeting? There ain't anything about meetings in here whatsoever. Those are the 3 things that are required. Okay. But even though we didn't like doing those things, don't forget they said that. Almost none of us like to do it. So why did we do it? And I would underline this, because we saw that it really worked in others. Remember when Bill saw Evie, when Evie came through the door and he said there was something completely different about him? His roots grasped new soil. He's been lifted from the bottom of the heap to a life that greater than he'd ever known, right? We saw that it really worked in others. That's why we have meetings, so that guys who have recovered can be meeting with people who have not yet found a solution. And we can say, I can show you how to do this out of this book. And let me tell you what it's done for me. So you can see that it really works. We have to have that. So if we see that it really works in others and have come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life. So there's 2 caveats there. 1, you're going to see people have recovered, but 2, here's the second question for a newer person. Have you come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life? In other words, is your life unmanageable? In other words, is your life so jacked up that you don't see any way out of it? As the doctor would say, have your problems piled up on you and become astonishingly difficult to solve? Just a mess. Now, if that's where you are, and you see people here that I've recovered, this is what I did, I used to feel just like you, and you know what? My life's not a mess anymore. And if you haven't found a way out of that, now we're not even talking about drinking. Most of us never even came here really to stop drinking. We just thought we would have to stop drinking. That's the gateway to get rid of all these problems. The problem is that we have all these problems, and we found a solution to that. So if you have found no solution to that, those are the 2 things. When therefore, here's another important piece. We were approached by those whom the problem had been solved. I think we even covered that a little bit last week. Again, they're telling us who approaches who. When you're a new person, you are approached by somebody who, quote, the problem has been solved. That is somebody who has recovered, approaches the new people. By the way, that's why there are people that are recovered sitting in this meeting. They're not here because they've already recovered, and they're not here to go to a meeting so that they can stay that way. They're here to look for new people to work with. And if you're new, hopefully, if you've come to this determination that you can't stop drinking, can't control it, and your life is a mess, and you're not able to straighten it out, and you're convinced of that, now you've got somebody that you can look to. It's just to meet these 2 people up, those who the problem's been solved with the sick people. And it says, once that connection's been made, there's nothing left for you to do as a newcomer but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. So we're going to say, boom, this is what we did. Are you interested? That's why, you might notice that in most other meetings, everybody has a chance to talk, right? We're here to show you, with one person talking, with this book and explaining what's in here, here's our solution. And the question is, are you interested? That's all that matters. That's your problems. We get it. We've all had the same ones, okay? The only thing we need to know about you is what your name is. We already know everything else, all right? We know the condition. The question is, there's nothing left for you to do but to pick up those spiritual kit of tools. Are you interested? Are you interested in having a mentor show you through this? If you're not, you're going to be sitting. If you're an alcoholic, you will stay in this condition of having untreated alcoholism. Even if you go to 90 meetings in 90 days, even if you just keep going to meetings, if you do not work this program, according to Alcoholics Anonymous, you will not recover. And if you will not recover, you are in danger of drinking any day, because your life's going to get so miserable. Your life is going to get so miserable that it's going to cause you to pick up a drink again. And you'll be going through this over and over. So that's the condition. Now, as recovered people, it says, we have found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed into a 4th dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. Notice they didn't say in there, we have gotten sober and stayed that way. It ain't about that. They're not even talking about all of my problems, they've kind of been fixed and straightened out. They're talking about something they said that they found much of what they consider to be heaven. They're talking about being rocketed into a 4th dimension of existence They didn't even dream was possible. Does that even sound real? I can confirm to you, and I've even talked about this last week of my own experience, that is the case. That is the case. I could have never gotten to where I am today. I couldn't have even dreamed getting to where I am today without without having gone through this process. They say the great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences. So what is a spiritual experience? That's what they say they've had, these deep and effective spiritual experiences. You may every once in a while hear somebody say, I've had this happen where a new person would tell me, well, oh, I had a spiritual experience. My last time I drank, I ended up in jail, and I was in the jail cell. I come to the next morning, puke all over me, and man, I asked God to help me, and I just felt this thing. So I know God was there. So I've had the spiritual experience. So what's next? Well, let's see exactly what they mean by a spiritual experience, because I got a little asterisk next to it. But they say this is what it looks like, a deep and effective spiritual experience. They say that, number one, it has revolutionized our whole attitude towards life. Revolutionized. That means it's completely turned around. So I ask you, while you had this thing happen while you were sitting in a jail cell, has it revolutionized your entire attitude towards life? Has it revolutionized your whole attitude towards everybody around you? And has it revolutionized your entire attitude towards God's universe? Because that's what they're talking about by a spiritual experience. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He's commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. I want to go back up to the spiritual experience in this paragraph, because this is important, because that is our solution. When they say there is a solution, that is the solution, is to have a spiritual experience. And they tell us what it looks like with our attitude. But let's look at this a little bit closer. And most of you know that I do not go outside of the first 196 pages of this book, but we are going to take a look back at Appendix 2, which is on page 567. And the only reason I want to do that is because they put that asterisk next to spiritual experience. And I want to make sure that we all understand what a spiritual experience is and what do they mean by that. They gave us a little clue about it, but let's see what they say. Top of 567, they say the terms spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book, okay, which upon careful reading, that would be studying, textbook, shows that, and I would underline this is their definition of a spiritual experience. It is a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism. You will recover from alcoholism if you have the spiritual experience. And the reason you'll recover from it is because you've had such a dramatic personality change, a personality change which we could not bring about by ourselves. At the bottom of the page, it highlights this a little bit more in the last paragraph. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines down. In the first full paragraph, it says, he finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life, and that such a change could hardly have been brought about by himself alone. Change in personality. What often takes place in a few months could seldom have been accomplished by years of self-discipline. I'm sorry. How long did they just say it could take to recover? A few months. You ever hear that at an AA meeting? I've heard people say, don't do the fourth step until you've had a year of sobriety. Well, this doesn't say that. This says you can be done with this deal and have recovered through your 9th step in a few months. Okay, that's their experience. That is our solution, and that is how they claim it to look like. Now let's go back to page 25. So that tells us what our solution is. When we have that profound alteration, that personality change, it will remove the insanity. And think about it, what it's really doing is what brings us remember I said that, we start thinking about, when we're sober, we start thinking about the ease and comfort from a few drinks. Well, the reason that we're thinking about that comfort is because we don't have comfort, right? The only reason you're going to think about comfort is I need comfort. It's because I don't have comfort. And the reason you don't have comfort, in the beginning of that statement, he says, because we're restless, irritable, and discontent when we're sober. So the only way to break that cycle to where you stop thinking about the alcohol, which is going to lead you to picking it up, is by being sober and not being restless, irritable, and discontent. And the reason we're restless, irritable, and discontent is not because of our drinking. That's not the case. That is our problem, is that we're restless, irritable, and discontent. If we can get rid of that, if we can be happy and sober, we will never, if we already have a sense of ease and comfort, we'll never be thinking about it again. We'll never have that insanity happen again. That's how this all connects together. Remember, he said our problems pile up on us and become astonishingly difficult to solve. That makes us miserable. Well, if all your problems become solved, you're no longer miserable. You're no longer thinking about the sense of ease and comfort. And that's what they're stating here. So they state, bottom of 25, if you're as seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there's no middle of the road solution. Okay, it's kind of like pregnancy. You're not kind of pregnant. You're either recovered or you're not. You're either going to be living this life that is like heaven, or you're going to stay with untreated alcoholism. There's no kind of, I'm feeling kind of good and I'm okay. It does not work that way. It's either one way, it's door number one or door number two. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible. And if we've passed into that region they talked about in the last page, from which there is no return through human aid, well, that leaves us with two alternatives. These are your two alternatives. One, door number one, is to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could. That's one. And two is to accept spiritual help. That's the only two options that they know of. No middle of the road. Accept spiritual help or go on to the bitter end, trying to blot out the consciousness of your intolerable situation. Kind of makes sense? So this we did because we honestly wanted to and were willing to make the effort. I'm going to go on a little bit here into this next statement here. What we're going to learn about here, they talk about a certain American businessman who had ability, good sense, and high character. We'll find later he also had a lot of money. The certain American businessman, his name was Roland Hazard. And if you guys were with us from the beginning or know any of the history of AA, it didn't start with Bill Wilson. Bill Wilson got these concepts from Evie Thatcher, which is his drinking buddy of many years, who had recovered. And Evie Thatcher got these ideas from this guy, Roland Hazard, which really, as far as we know, this is really where AA actually begun. It was never called AA, but this is where these concepts were first picked up, as this guy named Roland Hazard. And it was in the early 20s that we're talking about here, just to put this into perspective. So this is what happened. For years, he'd floundered from one sanitarium to the other. He'd consulted the best-known American psychiatrists. Then he had gone to Europe, placing himself in the care of the celebrated physician, the psychiatrist, Dr. Jung, who prescribed for him. Though experience had made him skeptical, he finished his treatment with unusual confidence. So Dr. Jung at that time would have been, as I understand it, the third best known psychiatrist in the world, right? You had Dr. Freud, then another person was called Dr. Adler, and this guy, Dr. Jung, and he could not get in to see either of the other two because they were not taking on new patients. He had all the money in the world to pay him, but he was able to get a hold of number three. And get this, he went to Europe, and back then you didn't use a plane. In the 20s, that means he, from the US, he got on a ship and made the journey all the way over to Europe. And he spent 1 year, a full year, working with this psychiatrist. And he says that he finished it with unusual confidence. So he felt this guy had really helped him. His physical and mental condition were unusually good. Above all, I would underline this, he says he believed he'd acquired such a profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind and its hidden springs that relapse was unthinkable. Okay, he thought, I get it. I know what's wrong with me, and I'm good to go. So as the story goes, he was going to go back to the United States, now being, I guess, what he might have thought was recovered. But the next statement says, nevertheless, he was drunk in a short time. He never even made it to the boat, and he drank again. More baffling still, he could give himself no satisfactory explanation for his fall. Didn't we just read about that? He has no idea why he picked it up. He just spent a year with a psychiatrist, gave up his work and everything, just to be at this place for 1 year to get well. And he didn't even make it back to the boat, and he's drunk. He had no idea. So what does he do? He went back to the doctor, whom he admired, and asked him point blank why he could not recover. He wished above all things, above everything, to regain self-control. He seemed quite rational and well-balanced with respect to other problems. Yet he had no control whatever over alcohol. Why was this? And he begged the doctor to tell him the whole truth, and he got it. And I would underline this. Third best psychiatrist in the world, been with this guy for a full year. And in the doctor's judgment, his assessment was that he was utterly hopeless. That is step one. Hopeless is defined as no possibility of a solution. Now, we already read in the beginning, Roland tried many things and he could not find a solution. He goes to this third best psychiatrist in the world. Now he's telling him, no, as medical community, we have nothing that we can do for you. You're done. You're hopeless. He could never regain his position in society, and he would have to go to place himself under lock and key or hire a bodyguard if he expected to live long. This was a great physician's opinion. But this man still lives and is a free man. He does not need a bodyguard, nor is he confined. In fact, he can go anywhere on earth where other free men can go without disaster, provided he's willing to maintain a certain simple attitude. He can go anywhere on earth other free men can go. That means that he can even go to bars, because that's where other free men go. How about that? Some of our alcoholic readers may think they can do without spiritual help. Well, let us tell you the rest of the conversation our friend had with his doctor. The doctor said, and I would underline this, you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. What is the mind of a chronic alcoholic? It is back on page 24, that one paragraph that's all in italics that I told you about. Can't reflect on the consequences. That is an alcoholic mind. You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. And I have never seen one single case recover where that state of mind existed to the extent that it does with you. Our friend felt as though the gates of hell had closed on him with a clang. He said to the doctor, is there no exception? You know, I often reflect on this. If he had not asked that question, those 4 words, we probably would not be sitting here today, because the guy just told him you're done. But he asked, is there no exception? And yes, the doctor replied, there is. Exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. So let's put this into perspective. He says, here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. So this doctor knows, and he says that throughout all of history, all the way back to early times, just every once in a while, just once here and there, few times throughout century after century, just a few times, we know that some people who are alcoholic have had vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomena. Phenomena means he doesn't know how they happened. He knows what they look like, but he doesn't know how to make it happen. They don't understand why it happened or how to make it happen. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. But underline this. This is his description. This is his description of what a spiritual experience looks like. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. That's it. Ideas, emotions, and that's everything. So everything you think and everything you do is completely turned upside down. And it's completely the opposite. He says, in fact, I've been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangement with you. With many individuals, the methods which I employed are successful, but underline, I have never been successful with an alcoholic of your description. What is his description? Hopeless. Why? Because he's one of those types that can never reflect on the consequences, and he'll always pick it up again. Nothing can be done for him, according to the doctor. I'm going to finish the next paragraph. Upon hearing this, our friend was somewhat relieved, for he reflected that, after all, he was a good church member. If I'm going to have a spiritual experience, then I must have to have something to do with the church, and I'm a good church member. This hope, however, was destroyed by the doctors telling him that while his religious convictions were very good, in his case, they did not spell the necessary vital spiritual experience. Vital, again, by the way, is a word that comes up constantly through this book. So you ought to know that definition. Vital means necessary for life. For an alcoholic, the spiritual experience is necessary for life, which we just read. If you want to live long, this is necessary. Here was the terrible dilemma in which our friend found himself when he had the extraordinary experience, which, as we have already told you, made him a free man. Finish the last paragraph before we stop for the day. It says, we in our turn sought the same escape with all the desperation of drowning men. What seemed at first a flimsy reed has proven to be a loving and powerful hand of God. A new life has been given us, or if you prefer, a design for living that really works. And we're going to stop there for today.